Morgan Toner and Gia Ditch.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you were from, your school days.
Okay. Well, I grew up in County Donegal in the Irish Republic. School days, went to a Catholic primary school, which was rather strict, that it was a number of presentation brothers, so it was an order of monks that ran the school, who were, some of them very strict, but we had one particular teacher, Brother Connor, who drove a converted ambulance. And one of the most fun things was, on a sunny day, he would take us out on a nature ramble, which would never be allowed now because there were 30 of us in the back of a converted ambulance standing up. And he would just take us out and would do weekend activities. We did mountain climbing. Now, I would have been 10 years of age. We had to abandon one because of high winds, so there was maybe 20 of us up a mountain, and he said we had to come down. Another occasion he took us fishing and dropped us off in twos round a lake, which would never be allowed now. 10-year-old children for a full day left on their own by the side of the lake. So that was some quite fun things that we did with Brother Connor. Some of the other teachers a little more strict, and then a Catholic secondary school as well, which originally was founded early 20th century. Boys who would go on to the priesthood, and they found that they didn't have enough numbers to sustain pupils, so it was open to everybody. But in your final year, you did get a letter from the principal, and it was a number of priests, and the principal was a priest, who would send you a letter saying, would you like to join the priesthood? And it just was, if anybody said yes, it was a whole celebration, because they had decided that's one that we didn't think we would get. So yeah, but quite strict schooling. When the television series Grange Hill was on, one of the actors in an interview said it was based on some Irish schools because people said it was really strict, whereas I thought it was quite lapse really, because we would never have been allowed out of lessons, we wouldn't have been allowed out of the school at lunchtime. With our school day at secondary school, 9 o'clock we started and we finished at 4 o'clock, and then nearly a 2-mile walk home in the evening. So by the time you did get home, did your homework, it really was time for bed because you were rather exhausted. And I think one of the things was walking home in the rain is one of my memories, because Donegal on the Atlantic coast, incredibly harsh winters, and lots of rain. Some beautiful countryside, but very wet.
And tell us a bit about your family and your house.
Yes, I'm the eldest of 4 boys. My dad worked in the local post office. My dad had finished school very early, and when we were growing up, he was very keen that none of us dropped out of school, that we continued on as far as we possibly could, with us all going to university as well. But really it was very much, you can't stop, you need to keep going. And my mother was a housewife. She had been a telephonist before she got married, and in those days a woman just simply gave up employment, reared a family, and then went back to work later in life, which my mother did in the local hospital.
And, sorry, Donegal, what's Donegal?
Countryside, very beautiful, quite rugged, lots of boglands, so some, particularly primary school, some children would play truant because they could earn money cutting peat for fuel during the winter, so that they maybe for 2 or 3 days would suddenly be very ill and couldn't make it to school. Lots of agriculture, potato growing, and that was another thing. People would play truant because you got £10 a day if you gathered potatoes, which was rather back-breaking work, but something that if people wanted to earn a little bit of money, they would ring in sick or get their parents, who would be in total agreement, would say, yes, you could go and gather the potatoes. And yeah, so Donegal, very beautiful, rugged, quite remote villages. I grew up in a town, but really very little transport links. Buses to nearby towns, but if you lived in a village, you really would have had to walk, and not very many cars either. That a lot of families wouldn't have had a car in the towns, yes, but in the countryside it would have been quite rare, in the 70s into the early 80s, for people to have a car. So it was very local community.
Did you feel that you was poor, or that you was
well fed, or did you notice anything looking back?
I think looking back, probably quite an affluent. There wasn't that much money, but really we had everything that we needed, and compared to some people, because we had a car, so that was one major thing. We always had an annual holiday, usually to a seaside town outside Dublin, because the rationale was if it was a rainy day, which it often was, we could go into the city, do the zoo. So yeah, I think looking back, probably quite privileged really that we didn't have to do the potato gathering or the peat cutting, and really we went to school and there was always things to eat. We always did lots of activities, the cinema, the swimming pool, so yes, I didn't really feel we missed out on anything at all.
Was it considered an honour for your family if somebody did go into the priesthood?
Oh gosh, yes, that if you could get anybody at all, or even a neighbour's child, the whole neighbourhood would celebrate. So for example, one of our neighbour's sons went into the priesthood, who was a few years older than I. We put up 3 miles of bunting. Every house has a papal flag, so we had the papal flag out. And on the day of the ordination, he did a tour of the town, and we all went outside to wave the car. The local bishop and him did a little circuit of the town. So yes, tremendous thing. The only sad thing was, if you weren't quite sure and you thought maybe you might want to do this, it was taken as definitely acceptance. So occasionally you did have then sadly people that would drop out later thinking, well, I was 14, 15 when I expressed this, and then suddenly I was fast-tracked. But if it all worked out, it was a tremendous honour to have. More rare for somebody to become a nun. So a few nuns, but not really. The whole focus would have been on the priesthood.
Did they celebrate, if somebody decided to become a nun, did they celebrate in the same way?
It was more low-key for a nun, because it tended to be with the nun that she'd be going into a convent and really cutting off some of former life, and sometimes we'd be given a new name as well, so depending on what the original name was, and she would become sister something else perhaps. So no, that was a bit more low-key. Still a celebration, and they still would have, but it was more a vow of poverty, and there would be no material possessions and things, whereas with a priest, they would be going on to have their own parish, they would need a car, they would have a housekeeper, a nice house. So it was a different, very little money, but there was a little bit of income generation, because if you had a bereavement and you wanted them to say a mass in honour of the deceased, you would buy a memorial card in the newsagent, take it to the priest and put in a £10 or a £20 note into it, which that was for the priest, and then on the day he would say the mass. At the beginning he would say, this is for so-and-so, and normally the family would go to that particular. So there was a few little perks that you could make a little bit of money. A lot of priests would then give the money away, but sometimes if you were running a car and petrol and things, that was a way of just making a little bit more money.
And were you a family that were religious? Did you go to?
Oh gosh, my mother's family. My mother grew up in the countryside, and you tended to find people in the countryside more religious than my father's family in the towns. So my mother was very much, you have to go, you have to do this. And I remember my first communion when I was 7. So when I was 8, they introduced the new way of receiving communion in the palm of your hands. And I dropped the communion one day. And my mother said I committed a mortal sin, but I thought, goodness, I'm only 8. And my dad and I had to go to the cathedral in the afternoon and move some pews looking for this communion wafer, which we couldn't find, but my dad did make up a story and that sorted it out. But yes, my mother, still is incredible, and you could not reason with her if she had set her mind on a particular way, but yes. And I think with the Catholic schooling as well, that we had saints' days and there would be masses. And for example, the secondary school was called St Eunan's College. So on St Eunan's Day, we would have a mass, and we had our own private chapel at the school as well. So yes, that I think that you had no choice. That it wasn't a case of believing or not believing. You were just doing it. You were just there, and you had to do it.